So the second movie I saw was The Woman in the Yard, and it was kind of disappointing and just had a bizarre message behind it, and we'll get into all that here in just a second. But first, I just want to say, apparently Alto Nights came out last week, and I just completely missed it. And with the Snow White review and just everything coming out in the following weeks, I probably won't be able to get to it. So if anyone was waiting on my review for that, I sincerely apologize, but I probably won't be able to get to it. The third movie I saw was A Working Man. I don't have enough thoughts on it to make a standalone review on it, so I'm just going to talk about it at the end of this video. But anyways, let's get right into the preliminary hearing. The movie stars Danielle Deadwyler, who I don't really recognize from anything. The cast is very small. There's only like 5 characters in the whole movie. The movie's rated PG-13, runs at 85 minutes, and has a budget of $12 million. Quick synopsis from IMDb. A mysterious woman repeatedly appears in a family's front yard, often delivering chilling warnings and unsettling messages, leaving them to question her identity, motives, and the potential danger she might pose. The trailers are actually what had me somewhat interested in this movie. The second one is definitely better. Told me everything I need to know, though I would have liked it if they elaborated more on this creepy woman. From this point forward, I will be talking spoilers, so if you want my final verdict spoiler-free, skip to this time in the video. The characters are decent. We get to spend some time at the beginning getting to know them. Ramona, our main character, is recovering from a major car accident in which her husband died and she just kind of crippled her leg. She's trying to grieve while also recovering, taking care of her kids, and, keeping the utilities in the house functional, so obviously a stressful situation for her. Her son Taylor is in his preteens, picking up her slack since obviously she can't perform chores as usual, and his younger sister Annie is a very small child just only learning to write. Then there's this woman that appears in the yard draped in all black. She's basically like the Death Angel but in horror movie form. She's similar to the evil force in the movie Lights Out, but while that force thrives in darkness, she sort of thrives in the light because she does her work through the shadows. And I thought this was really creative, but the issue with this is that the woman doesn't really do much in the movie. She just spends a lot of time sitting in this chair and she kind of messes with them a little bit with the shadows, but it's not until like over halfway through the movie that she starts to do dangerous things like luring Annie to certain places and just like destroying the house and stuff like that. The story is fine at first, but then it just really gets lost in the woods. Like I said, for the first 30 minutes, the pacing is pretty steady, but then I'm starting to think like, this plot really needs to start going somewhere because it picks up speed a little bit, but really not too much. It's at the hour mark when the plot really flies off the rails and just gets super confusing. With these reviews, I try my best to examine everything and come to a solid conclusion, but for this movie, I had a really hard time doing it. For example, around that hour mark, they go up and hide in the attic because it's like super dark up there. But then the woman in the yard just suddenly appears in the attic and then she like swallows Annie into the darkness. But that's never really addressed. And then Ramona goes downstairs and then finds this portal in her late husband's gun safe. There's like this tunnel. She walks through it. There's this opening at the end. And when she walks out of a literal mirror into a past memory of hers with her husband, and then she suddenly awakes as the woman in the yard, all draped in black and stuff, and then she like pulls the drape off, and then she ends up back in the attic, and it was like, what was the point of all that? Because none of it really made sense, and it was never really addressed. There was just no point to it. And I mean, that's kind of how the rest of the story goes. None of the shit is really explained or justified. The plot sort of just like trips and then tumbles across the finish line. The ending is super anticlimactic. Basically, we learn that Ramona wants to commit Sudoku, but she doesn't have the courage to do so. So this woman, who's like the Death Angel, is coming after her because like today's the day she's gonna do it. And then at the very end, this woman from the yard is trying to help Ramona commit Sudoku, but then it's kind of revealed that the whole time, all Ramona had to do to conquer this woman from the yard was just overcome her intrusive thoughts. And it's just like, seriously? That's all it took? I'm just sitting there like wondering if my time was well spent for this movie. And it's like, that was it. All right. The reason this doesn't add up is because this woman is the Death Angel, right? So it makes sense that she's coming after Ramona, but she's coming after her kids too, her dog, her livestock. Like, what? They play it off like everything was just a psychological horror and the reality of many of the events are just left ambiguous, I guess. I think this is kind of lazy because it really just undermines the potential power of this evil woman in the yard. The whole movie just came off like one big Sudoku prevention PSA, which is fine. Like, I'm all for raising awareness about mental illness, especially in kids, but doing that through a horror movie is just a really bizarre way to do that. I have this philosophy in storytelling, which is that if you're going to take on such a heavy topic, such as this one, you gotta be really careful when writing your story and you gotta take very seriously what you're writing. And I'm not saying that they handled this recklessly at all. I'm just saying that it was more so that they handled it sloppy because this was not a good storyline and the end was not at all compelling. It was just another tired analogy for fighting your inner demons. And apparently what I'm saying is controversial. I posted my immediate thoughts on Reddit about this movie and people did not like it. I'm not saying that the writer's intentions weren't noble. I'm just saying it's just really bizarre. And it's kind of disappointing because it's the same producers of The Black Phone, same director of The Shallows, which from what I remember were both very good movies. So it's like, what went wrong with this one? I did, however, like the theme of the movie, which is that like her whole life is backwards and there's like this big emphasis on mirrors. There's this one scene where they're about to get into a car and in the reflection of the window, you can see this sign that's advertising a movie about mirrors. But when you're reading the sign, the orientation is actually correct when in real life it would be backwards on the reflection. So that was cool. The other scene where she walks out of the mirror, that looked really cool. And then after she walks out of the mirror, her whole bedroom is like flipped the other way. It looked really cool. The movie is not really that scary at all. There was only one point where I was really caught off guard, and that's when she hallucinates stabbing her daughter while she's holding her. But again, there was no implication in the plot with that. The rest of the jump scares in the movie are just fake and aren't really that scary. It's not that they're unnecessary, but they're not important either. The entire production for this movie seems to be relatively small. 99% of it takes place on this farmhouse. There's only like 3 real cast members, and then the credits only roll for like 2 or 3 minutes, so. There's no politics, luckily. I was nervous at first seeing the all-black cast because Jordan Peele has just ruined that sort of thing for me, but after doing some quick research, I realized it's not going to be that kind of movie. So for my final verdict, I will be ruling against The Woman in the Yard at 29%. This could have been an interesting movie, but the creative talent is just gone here. Now, should you go see it, rent it, stream it, or just not watch it at all? I would say don't really go see it. I'm honestly going to forget this movie in no time, and I'm sure you guys would too. Blumhouse movies have just been really hit or miss lately. Okay, now I'll talk about A Working Man just briefly. The movie is super mediocre. I predicted this in my Novocaine review. It starts off really cool because it makes you think we're going to get all this background on this guy's military history, but we don't really get that at all. It's just him beating up a bunch of bad guys with no real justification. There's hardly any theme to this movie. You guys already know what I think about the whole guy who you wouldn't expect to be good at fighting is actually good at fighting genre. I think it's just super tiresome. But at least most of the time, the movies have theme to it. Like Violent Night had the Christmas theme. Novocaine had the absence of pain theme, which I thought was really creative. And then Love Hurts had the Valentine's theme, albeit very subtle. The theme in this movie is supposed to be like he's retired military, who's now blue-collar working class. But they only commit to this in the sense that he's like borderline homeless. It's like almost insulting that this is how they portray the working class and that the only thing they really did with the theme was just make this guy look super poor when in reality his job probably pays pretty good. The whole premise of the movie is that this girl gets kidnapped by this neo-Russian mafia for trafficking purposes, but the whole motivation for taking down these bad guys is way less about rescuing the girl and just way more about taking out the bad guys just to do it, which I think is just backwards. I think it should be more about the girl. The premise is highly unrealistic because this girl gets kidnapped and the police only write a report. They don't actually investigate. I understand that they do this like plot line where the cops are dirty and they're like corrupt and whatnot, but let's just break this down. Your daughter goes missing. You file a report and expect like a detective to be assigned to your case and they're going to be working really hard, but no, they're just going to write a report. Can you imagine what the PR fallout on that sort of thing would be like? It would be fucking diabolical. It's also like multiple agencies involved in this corruption, which I struggle to make sense of. But, anyways, you would think that regardless of the corruption, they would still investigate her disappearance because if they didn't, the public outcry would just expose all of this incompetency like immediately. It just doesn't make sense. The dialogue is cartoonish throughout. The movie does take itself seriously, but the dialogue just doesn't really match up with that. And a big part of this problem is Jason Statham himself. And I don't mean to be rude because I understand that that's what his actual voice sounds like. But when it's so heavy and serious like that, it comes off way more cartoonish than it does dramatic. You look at Butch from the TV show The Boys, and he's much the same, but it actually works because that's comedy. It's supposed to be funny. Stop casting Jason Statham in these like really serious roles. I feel like he would do better in something more comical. It's disappointing because the director of this movie, David Ayer, also directed my second favorite movie of all time, Fury. So, I mean, I understand it's like kind of hard to live up to that sort of standard, but I definitely expected better from him. For my final verdict, I'll rule slightly against A Working Man at 46%. I would say wait until it's streaming to watch it because I can understand why some people find it entertaining, but it's definitely not worth paying much money to watch. But that is all for this review. If you enjoyed these reviews, please consider dropping a like. Again, next week we have a Minecraft movie coming out, so make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss that one. But that's all for this case. This court is adjourned.